What's up guys? I finally did it. I finally bought an e-bike. This is the Giant Reign E+2. This is a little more than just a first ride impression, but not quite a full review yet. I'll be talking about why I chose this bike, how it's performed so far, and how it's changed riding for me coming from someone who hasn't really spent much time on e-bikes. So let's get into it. When looking at a bike, maybe the most important thing I'm looking at is geometry, and with the e-bike, it's no different. This one stood out. It has a 480 mil reach and a 455 mil chainstay, which happens to be almost identical to the Frameworks Enduro bike, which I've referenced as probably the closest thing to my ideal setup. That was really a huge part of the decision. Plus the price is right. It's on sale for $5,400 with a really solid build, but really it was the Geo that had me look towards this bike and eventually pull the trigger. So this footage is from my very first ride. It definitely wasn't a love at first ride sort of deal. Riding an e-bike, especially a full powered one, is definitely an adjustment. This bike comes in at 55 pounds in its stock build. And the biggest thing I noticed is that you really have to have respect for the weight of the bike, because if you mess up a braking point or if you get bucked offline, the consequences seem to be higher. It just feels like it's much harder for me to bring this bike back from a mistake. The few times where I felt like the bike's getting away from me and I have to like really lock down and commit, the geometry and composure from the bike is there for it to work out in the end, but I still have that feeling of apprehension when that prevents me from just kind of like letting loose like I would on a normal bike. And I think what contributes to that is honestly the suspension spec on this thing. It's a Zeb RC front fork and a Fox Performance rear with just rebound adjustment. So the suspension honestly feels pretty damn good, but when you bottom out, there's just a moment of weightlessness and chaos before the bike recomposes itself. And there's just not enough damping force to handle the weight of the bike, plus really aggressive terrain. So it feels pretty good, but then it just gets to a point where it's overwhelmed. And I think that puts a performance ceiling on the bike. So you can ride it at a high level, but you're just kind of dealing with that when things get a little crazy. But besides the suspension, I was honestly really impressed with the build and spec of the bike. None of it is light. The giant wheels that come spec'd on this thing are for sure heavy, but they've been really solid so far. Haven't had to touch them. The SLX brakes have honestly been incredibly impressive. They have pumped up a tiny bit on really long descents, but with the stock rotors, like they haven't really fallen on their face and lost power. The only things I've changed are the cockpit setup. The giant bars that came on were way too low. So I put a 40 mil stem and these deity bars, which helped a lot. And then the front tire, I switched to a DH casing because it came with a EXO Plus front tire. That EXO casing has way too much load going through it with a long chainstay and a heavy ass bike that it was just squirming, and it made me scared that it was just gonna disappear on me. So a max grip DH casing front tire helped out dramatically. But besides the cockpit and front tire, I'm running this thing bone stock. I'm super stoked with the purchase. Riding this thing has been amazing for me. I'm not fit enough to ride 5 days a week. So getting out on this bike just whenever I have time, just for an hour, it just makes everything like so much more fun when there's not a consequence to like go jump off this or check this thing out. I have a lot of areas close to my house that aren't anywhere close to riding zones, but they have some trails, some fire roads, some weird features, and a few little sketchy Grom jumps. So I can spend an entire afternoon just sessioning the crap out of this stuff. And it just makes it so I don't really have an excuse not to go out for a ride. With an hour of light left in the day, I can go out and just go on a tear and session stuff until the sun goes down. So that's been amazing. Plus, from just a ride experience standpoint, you know, there's definitely some drawbacks, but there's definitely some drawbacks performance-wise to riding a really heavy e-bike, but it also adds some benefits as well. On slower, chunkier terrain, the bike is definitely awkward. If the bike's getting pitched forward, it's getting pitched forward with a lot of momentum. The fork dives more, and then when you like come back on the rear wheel, there's just a lot more seesawing in awkwarder, chunkier terrain. But as soon as the speeds pick up and like the chassis kind of has an opportunity to mellow out and the frequency of the bumps gets a lot higher, this thing just seems to float like a magic carpet ride, and it's super planted, super confidence inspiring. It seems like there's a lot more traction. So that's kind of what I've been able to gather from a performance perspective is low frequency, high impact or larger hit bumps. This bike kind of gets boggled up in it. But as soon as the speeds pick up and it's higher frequency bumps, it's really amazing. The Geo is pretty spot on. I mean, I picked it for a reason. I have a lot of experience kind of sussing out what I want from a Geo perspective. And I would say on the e-bike, it's sussed out pretty well. I mean, the front end has a ton of grip. I think I can still like get the front end up in a manual. Takes a bit of effort, but it does everything super well. Like, I think the handling is really neutral and predictable. It makes it so whenever the bike has felt like it's getting away from me and I'm kind of having a butt pucker moment, as long as I focus and commit, the bike responds how I need it to in that situation. So I think that's super important. I've argued for years that balanced geometry that's confidence inspiring, that puts weight on the front wheel is actually more playful because you can just make calculated rider inputs and get the bike to do what you want instead of having a twitchy, unpredictable sort of bike. So the weight definitely makes it a different interpretation of what is playful, but I do think I can, whip this bike around and put it in the places I need to be, given that it is a heavy e-bike. The geometry feels super balanced, and I think especially for an e-bike, a longer chainstay is a no-brainer. You have all that power up steeper climbs, and that long chainstay keeps the front end planted and makes the climbing experience a lot better. I guess this is where I can start to talk about the E part of the e-bike. This has the Yamaha system. I believe it's a 625 watt-hour battery. I don't have a ton to compare it to. The Shimano system I rode on a Pivot Shuttle LT felt like it had a bit more torque and power, but I'm also getting a really impressive amount of range out of this battery, and I guess I don't really need it to be the absolute fastest. It seems like from the 3rd to the 5th highest power setting, there's not a huge difference in power, at least from my perspective. The whole integration of the battery and the adjuster on the lever, I'm a huge fan of. It's just super clean. I don't need like a heads-up display. The adjustment works, and yeah, it's a really clean and well thought out system. Overall, I've been super happy with the bike. I've been riding it a ton. It's been hard to justify getting on the normal bike when I can smash out 3 times as many laps on the e-bike, but I'll be conscious not to become a full-time e-biker. Getting back on the normal one, I definitely appreciate the freedom and confidence it gives me. Like I said, I have a bit of apprehension with my riding with this thing, just because I feel like you gotta respect the weight. It's a burly boy. But this is going to be an awesome test platform for the channel. Going to be doing a lot of brake testing with this bike. I've got the Lewis Components brakes that have kind of made a few waves on the internet. I'm also going to be upgrading the suspension to an Öhlins coil and an RFX 38. I think that'll be awesome to see how this bike performs with the upgrade in suspension because, like I said, I think that's the biggest thing holding this bike back at the moment. So let me know what you guys want to know about this bike. I'll be putting a bunch more time on it, but I am so stoked to have this thing. It's been an awesome addition for the fleet, and you guys will be seeing a lot more content with this bike going forward. And if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to check me out on Patreon. I post videos 2 weeks early over there, plus original content, and I do my best to interact with the community. So that's a great way to help out these videos. But either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.